All right, so let's see. Note, this mixture is different at different power settings. Oh. All right, so also inside of the aircraft, and we go back to, we can just say a fixed pitch. The throttle, which is black, and next to it, red, is the mixture control, the manual mixture control, which as a pilot, or passenger if you can reach it, you can actually move that. And that is where you control the mixture. So it's not like we're talking about all these mixture things. It's like, well, what does that have to do with me? Never going to touch it. Yeah, actually, you have to have an understanding of this, not only from a pilot's perspective, but pilots are going to ask you questions, and you don't want to say things that are incorrect, which then does not make you look good. So what is the leaning procedure for this one? So if I want best power, the manual is pretty much going to tell me to, it's going to tell me that this isn't working. Oh, are you kidding me? Stand by. No. Huh? There you go. You might have it. No. It hates me.
The button is jammed.
Huh?
Is there a kick button on it?
No. On the pin?
Yeah.
Yeah. It keeps wanting to stick. See? Told you, open too much stuff. Never had these problems when I used the race board and pin. All right, so what was I saying here?
Something's jammed.
Something is not happy. Please stand by.
Do we need to call a technician in?
We might just have to go back to classroom 1.
Yeah, do
I don't know. No, I will not give up.
Never give up.
A click button's jammed somewhere.
I don't have a click button.
Some button is jammed. Yeah, there we go.
No, that's my mouse. I cannot write with that.
Oh.
Where's what?
Where's your cricket?
I don't know. For those of you listening at home, you're like, damn, this is one boring class, man. What's wrong with this guy? Look at that. Woo! You know, the problem is we just took a break. We just got to knock out the breaks. All right, so what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to get best power. How do I get best power? If I'm up at altitude, I'm going to lean until RPM and airspeed. What do you think? Peak out. So let's say I go up to 5,000 feet. I got my fixed pitch propeller, and I'm running at a certain, I set my RPM, let's just say I set it at 2,500 RPM, and now I can take my mixture and start slowly pulling it out. Because I've got up to 5,000 feet, right? So am I going to be running rich or lean at that point?
Rich.
I'll be running rich because I've got less air. Now, volume-wise, the carburetor actually kind of thinks it's the same. It doesn't really know, but the weight has changed because I'm up in the air. So now I'm going to be running rich. And so I've set my RPM at a specific spot, and as I start pulling out the mixture, it's going to get closer and closer and closer to, I don't want to say stoichiometric because we know that's wrong now, but it's going to get to best power. And what happens is the power increases in the engine. I didn't touch the throttle. What's the power going to do? I have more power. RPM is going to start going up. RPM goes up. What should miles per hour do? It should go up, I would hope. All right, so if I do that and I pull out the mixture, here's the mixture is right here. Right, I pull that out, manual mixture, until I see that peak, then I'm at what?
Peak power.
Best peak power right there. And we figured that that's going to be about what?
12.
Maybe 12 to 1. All right, so now I'm going to throw something out here. Okay, this is about 100 degrees ROP, and that stands for rich of peak. All right, now I need to stop and tell you what that is all about. Not all aircraft, but certainly I put this particular one in my aircraft. I have this one. Some Cessnas, or actually I shouldn't say Cessnas, some aircraft come with this right here, but this is an exhaust gas temperature gauge. So this little Alcor one, really, that was the original exhaust gas temperature gauge. And what is different about that gauge than all of the other ones?
It's fixed.
Only one reading.
Okay, well, yeah, no, one reading, and it doesn't quite show it as well as it should. But you'll notice the next one over is also Alcor. And the two Alcors are missing something that all the other ones have. Numbers. All right, so when this particular guy, does it say that on there? Yeah, it says it on there. So when he first produced this, he didn't have any numbers. Put a little asterisk on there. What's the asterisk mean? It means it's like, I think, 80 or 80% of scale, I think is what it means. That's all it means. Yeah, it's just, that's near the end of the scale, right? Because you need an asterisk. You couldn't tell otherwise. So, and the whole point behind this exhaust gas temperature is that it's very different than everything else. When I say oil temperature, we all know at this point now that the engine manufacturers said, okay, oil temperature should really be the temperature of the oil as it goes into the engine, right? If you remember, that's what we said. And if I said the cylinder head temp, that means the temperature of the cylinder, right? Okay, but now when I say exhaust gas temperature, you have to stop and think just a second, a couple of things. Number one, is the exhaust gas temperature coming out of a cylinder consistent? It's pulsating. So it's super hot, then nothing. It's super hot, then nothing. All right, so that's, Now, also, what if I take a probe and I measure the exhaust gas temperature 1 inch away from the exhaust valve? Okay, and then I have another cylinder, but I don't have room there. I'll put it 6 inches down. Two completely different readings, right? Okay, so that's the whole point here is when the guy who developed this said, I'm not putting numbers on it because it's not relevant what the number is. And honestly, unless you're looking at a turbine inlet temperature, and I'm talking about recips, and that's the temperature going to the turbine wheel of the supercharger, then it's important, but that's a very specific thing. Other than that, it's not specific. It doesn't mean anything. And so you can't get really fixated on that. And some people even say this is an exhaust gas temperature probe gauge. All right. So, but what an exhaust gas temperature gauge does for you, and so why did I put one in mine? I went through the expense of putting in, and Phil laughs at me a little bit because nobody with a Cessna 150 does this, but the reason why I wanted to do it is because I wanted to experiment with exhaust gas and cylinder head temp, and that's kind of what I want to do. So I went through the expense of putting in a 4-probe CHT EGT. CHT stands for what? Cylinder head temp, and EGT is exhaust gas temp. Okay, so that I can monitor all of them. Now I really did want a 4-probe cylinder head temp because I'm really particular about where my cylinder head temps are. But exhaust gas temp, there's no red line. It just is what it is. And so the idea was that, and I'll show you some more charts, we'll get back into this in a minute, but I want you to understand where I'm going, this rich of peak, lean of peak, is that as you pull back on the mixture, the exhaust gas gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and it gets to a point as you're pulling it where it'll peak, and you keep pulling it back, it's going to go back the other way. All right? But something you have to think about, and so we'll talk more about what that means and the correlation between exhaust gas and cylinder head temp. They don't rise together and fall together. They rise and fall separately. So you could put an exhaust gas temp. You could be, oh boy, I don't want my exhaust gas temp. Well, perfect example. Most engine manufacturers tell you you should run your aircraft engine about 50 degrees rich of peak. So it means you pull back on that mixture until you find peak. Then what am I going to do? Push it back in. So you're going to bring it peak, and then you want to cool it off by 100 degrees by pushing it in. Now the problem with that is, that sounds great. Now look at a curve of what's happening with the cylinder head temps. That's the peak cylinder head temp spot. That's where you bake your cylinders. So we'll talk a lot more about that. But I want to tell you what, I wrote this note here. Best power was about 100 degrees rich of peak. So rich of peak what? It's their exhaust gas temperature. It means I pulled it out, I leaned it until it got to the peak. And if I keep leaning it, it's going to fall. Nope, got to push it back in a little bit. So I push it in, I found my peak exhaust gas temp. It's the hottest I can make the exhaust gas temp. And then rich of peak means I did what? Push in the knob or pull it back. Push it in a little bit, richen it up a little bit. So I richen it up, it's going to fall 100 degrees. So that's 100 degrees rich of peak.
Kevin.
Yeah.
So this like mixture tab, or what is it called? How is that different from like the lever on the stand?
The red knob I'm talking about versus the one that was in the middle for you guys, it's the same thing.
Okay.
It's the mixture control. So it's the manual mixture control. All right. So let's see. Okay. So we have then I'm going to talk to you about lean best power and rich best power. So where's best power on this one? That's it. Hannah's got it right here. It'd be best power. Okay. And then, so this would be lean best power. Yep. And rich best power. And why do we say that? Because there's very, very little difference between here and here, between lean and rich. So I can lean it back just a little bit. And why would I want to do that? Save a little bit of fuel. Rich it up a little bit. Why would I want to do that? Well, you can have a little bit more cooling. All right. So best power is right in the middle. Lean best power, rich best power. That's what I'm talking about right here. So lean best power is the leanest mixture that will still produce the maximum power, and rich best power is the richest that will still produce best power. It's that range. Hold my breath every time I come back here. Please work. All right, C. It's out that way, C. Lean best power. What keeps an aircraft engine cool? Okay, what's the number one thing that it needs for cooling? I know, it's like, well, you could argue oil, because without oil, it's going to get really hot, isn't it? But for design of cooling, assuming that everything's there, air is the number one, then oil, then fuel is a coolant. All right, so that is an important point. Fuel is a coolant. So if I were if I needed more cooling, I would richen the mixture. And actually, carburetors are designed that when you're taking off at your 100% power, they're designed usually in some way, shape, or form to automatically give you a super rich mixture. And it's the fuel that's not getting burned is actually part of the cooling of the engine. So lean best power mix. That was A on the figure we just looked at. That's the leanest mix that still produces max power. We have rich best power. And that was the line B on that. And that's the richest mix that still produces max power. So what I want you to get a really strong idea of is the fact that without changing the throttle, I can change the mixture, and by changing the mixture, especially on a fixed pitch propeller, I will change what? I will change power, which changes RPM. And the reason why it's so important that you get this is because I will have you on every carburetor that you guys work on that we can run, I'm going to have you adjust the idle mixture. And in some ways, in some carburetors, the only way you can do it is to actually use the setting that is for mechanics only on the carburetor and screw in the little screw, just like you would be the red knob or the mixture. You will screw it in until you see a peak, and then start to fall off. And you back it out a little bit and peak. So what happens when you get the peak with that little mixture knob? Your what do we call that? Best power. Okay? And so if I said to you, I want you to adjust the carburetor so that at idle it is 50 RPM rich of peak, what does that mean?
Bring it to best.
Bring it to best.
And then reach it until it says.
Until it drops another 50. So like for the Stromberg, you just have a screw on there and you actually have to do it while it's running. On the Marvel shovelers, which you'll get into, it has an actual idle cutoff. So you can actually set it and then pull the mixture all the way out to kill the engine. You can watch your RPM go up a little bit and then fall. So, but on the Stromberg, you can't do that. You actually have to do it while the engine's running, which is not something we do on aircraft, but if you can get the idea.
That screw is controlling both air, it's just air, or you're controlling the fuel as well?
Well, it's got a bleed in it, so you never control just fuel. Well, I shouldn't say never do. There's a little bit of air mixed in that fuel, but you're not necessarily controlling the volume, the main part of the air. All right. So we got those. Now we got best economy. And now this is where all these cheap Bonanza owners, their ears just best economy. Now we're talking. All right. Produces the greatest amount of power in relation to the fuel burned. That's like best miles per gallon. Best economy is, I would want best economy if I wanted to go somewhere and I was most concerned about getting to my destination and the least amount of fuel burned. All right? If I want to get there the quickest, what am I going to do? Best power. Okay? Yeah, that's true. Let's see. Yeah, that's equivalent to most miles per gallon.
So that would be lean of peak.
Yep. Well, not necessarily. I don't want to say that, but yeah, it is. It really is. You'd lean the heck out of it. So, and we'll talk more about that one.
Did you say the most manuals say you should go 50 RPM below?
Not RPM. We only, and I'm going to do this, and so I want to explain this because I misspeak at this sometimes. So I want you to know when to catch me. And so if I'm talking about mixtures at idle, I'm going to be talking about 50 degrees rich in RPMs. Anything outside of idle, when I'm talking about flight characteristics, it's got to be degrees in relation to the EGT probe. So 50 degrees.
Because I was just checking in the pH of the arrow.
Oh, good.
And it says to lean the mixture until peak EGT is reached, then enrich the mixture until temperature drops a minimum of 25 degrees Fahrenheit. And I remember on the EGT, it's basically a little tick mark.
Mm-hmm.
That's 25, and the large ones are 50. But I remember that you just said, well, if you do that, then you're actually baking your cylinder heads.
Yeah.
So this is completely wrong, actually, what they were recommending.
That's correct.
Wow.
I'm going to, well, I'm not going to say it's correct. I'm going to say I'm going to give you the facts, and I'm going to let you decide what you think. Juan, would you run your engine for 25 degrees, rich of peak?
Depends on the altitude.
Okay, depends on the altitude. See?
Well, and he's better off because he has his
G1000.
well, and his CHT.
Yeah.
So he probably controls his engine rather with the CHT than with the EGT.
You
But
can,
if-
absolutely.
But if you don't have the cylinder head temperature, then your exhaust gas is kind of the only tool which you have to.
And that's why I wanted a 4 probe in mind. I wanted to know what I'm doing to my cylinders as I'm leaning out. I want to know that I'm staying within my green zone, which my green zone is way lower than what Continental wants. 400 to me, that's red line. But Continental's much higher. But
So Kevin, if EGTs are not that red, there's no red line and all that, you don't burn exhaust valves by having higher exhaust temperature.
well, we're going to get into that. But I'm going to say you will. But I've read stuff that says you don't.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say you do, and I'm going to say that it's really a combination of the two. And I've read some really good stuff that said you should think in that way. It's and I'm sorry if I'm talking and you're like, what the heck is this guy talking about? We'll get around to it. Well,
Yeah, there's
Rabbit
a really,
trail.
There's a really good article. I forgot the guy who wrote it.
Okay.
All about EGT, and he actually recommends if you're a good pilot, always run lean of peak because it'll be better for your engine.
okay, so
But
I've got, get it. This is a bit of a rabbit trail, but since I want everybody to kind of catch up, and I'll write notes on it later. We're gonna come right back around to it. So if you hate it when we keep circling stuff, you can just like ignore me right now. But what these guys are talking about, and this right here, and I'm sorry, it's not. It should be bigger, but I can't make it that. This is what this is talking about. So this line right here, if you can see that line right there, that's exhaust gas temperature on the top, and below here is a cylinder head temp. So what do I have right here? That's peak EGT. Okay, so I'm strictly talking just peak EGT. You can see actually off in the corner right here that it says best economy range, but I'm talking about right now that's peak EGT. And if I bring this thing about 25 to 50 degrees rich of peak, I'm going to put it right in this zone right here. And what does this zone represent here? This is my cylinder head temp. So what am I doing to my cylinder head temps?
Murdering.
Yes, it is the highest. Down here is specific fuel consumption. So if we look at the bottom right here and we go to the very bottom of this, that in fact is my best economy. So best economy is going to happen here on this line. See, it does say best economy range. And which side of my EGT is that on? Rich of peak or lean of peak? It's lean of peak. All right, so 50 degrees. I don't know why it keeps doing that. 50 degrees lean of peak and 50 degrees rich of peak. Okay, I'm getting the same exhaust gas temperature either which way, but what am I doing to my cylinder head temps?
Dropping it. So
Okay, and one side I'm right here, and on the other I'm over here on cylinder head temps. Which side, stop that, which side do you want to be on? Okay, and like I told you, when I went to Lycoming, they damn near came to blows on this. And they're like, don't ever run your engine lean of peak. You will completely destroy it. Now, there's a caveat to all of this, and that is do not run lean of peak at high power settings. Okay, once you get above like 75% for Lycoming, and Continental wants more like 65, they're more conservative. Once you get above these numbers, then everything changes. Then you had better be on the rich side of peak. Why? Because detonation happens. Remember going back to our fuel? How do we designate fuel? What was it called? 8087. And then we even talked about the 100 low lead, which is really more like 104, 130. What's the 104 mean? Lean, what's the 130? Rich. Okay, so when I over lean it, what am I doing to my octane rating or performance numbers? They're going down. So when you go on the other side of peak EGT, you're risking detonation. And when you get over 75% power, you better believe you're risking detonations. That's a whole different thing. Right, but now you bring it back down and talk about, okay, I'm below 75% power. I'm in a cruise range. What can you do? Well, you can see it right here. You can go 50 degrees lean at peak, 50 degrees rich at peak. What do you want to be?
Lean.
Okay, lean. So it's not always that cut and dry. Because what if I'm in a hurry to get somewhere?
You're gonna be at max power.
Do I want to go lean at peak if I'm in a hurry?
No.
No. See, that's back into our best economy, best miles per gallon. I'm in a hurry to get somewhere. I'm flying one of those, I can't say King Air because it's wrong engines. What's that?
One of those G1000.
Yeah. You're like one. You're flying drugs back and forth from T1. The more trips you make, the more money, somebody's got to pay for that plane.
With the rental airplanes that people pay by the time, so they never run out of peak.
That's the best example I've ever heard. That's better than a drug one, probably. Yeah, you're renting a plane. Yeah, by the hour. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, you got to get somewhere. So where do I want my power? Well, I want my power to be over here somewhere, right? I want a lot of power. So, and since we're talking about this, let's talk about why this is this way. So why, when I'm over here in this best power range, did my cylinder and exhaust temps drop so far?
More air.
Too much fuel.
More fuel.
You're adding a bunch of fuel, which can cool things down. Also, you're extracting more work out of it. But what was the trade-off? Economy. Burning a bunch of fuel. So, and that really starts to matter when you're flying a twin with it sucks a lot of gas. And you're trying to get somewhere. Yeah.
Nice.
So you're finding peak with RPM, but
No.
you're leaning.
No, you're setting your RPM to where you're 75%. Say you want to cruise at 75% power. Okay, so you're going to look at your chart and your POH. Do you have one open there?
Yeah.
Give me an altitude and a
Hang on. If I can.
so you're at a specific altitude.
75, 2300 RPM at 3000 with.
Give me some high altitude. 5,000, 8,000.
6,000 altitude.
6,000.
2400 RPM with 23.5 manifold pressure.
Okay, so he's up at 2,400 RPM. All right, is that a constant speed?
It's constant speed.
Okay, so and of course we have to do manifold pressure, which plays into it. But so you're up at 2,400 RPM now. So you're getting way up there in RPM, right? At 6,000 feet. So I'm going to set the RPM to where it should be and say, okay, that's 75% power. And in his case, he had to set the manifold pressure. Then you're going to start pulling back and leaning it out. And that will change your RPM. So you can readjust it. All right. That was a bit of a rabbit trail. We good there? At least to understand where I'm talking about here.
We're good, Phil.
We're good.
Wow, he went there.
Now I must ask, what did I do? The rabbit trail?
Oh, I think that's excellent.
Is it okay though if I
No,
announce that
thank
it's a
you.
rabbit trail? When I first started teaching, people were making fun of me. They would say, yeah, other teachers they'd say, oh, some teachers, man, they just go off on these rabbit trails. They're gone for a long time. You're like, squirrel. Okay, back. So they would always say, I'm the squirrel guy. Squirrel. All right. Best economy. We had that. Most. F. All right. I think your book talks about this, but I am. We don't talk miles per gallon in aircraft. We talk specific fuel consumption, which is, it's kind of the same thing. It's just different. So it's a term used to indicate economic operation. Of an engine. And it's like miles per gallon. And the formula is specific fuel consumption equals pounds of fuel per hour divided by horsepower. So if I wanted to know the specific fuel consumption of a specific race plane, and this race plane that we will use will be a Cessna 150 with a whopping, how much? 100, how many horsepower? I wish.
80 or 70.
100 horsepower. 100 horsepower where?
Top condition sea level.
Top condition, sea level on a
Standard.
day. All right, so what's POH stands for? Piece of, no.
Unwash.
Pilot's Operating Handbook. All right. It tells me that I should burn about 5.8 gallons per hour at 77% of my brake horsepower. So, 5.8 gallons per hour. But what's my formula ask for? Pounds. How many pounds per gallon is fuel?
Times 6.
Okay, times 6. Over 77% of my brake horsepower, which is 100. So that is 34.8 divided by 77 equals a specific fuel consumption of 0.45. Well, now aren't you glad you asked? So it's 0.45. But if you had to do something like that, that's exactly where they get it. And so then you can just compare the numbers between one engine or another and figure out what your specific fuel consumption is. Do I want that number to go up or down? What's better? I was hoping someone would answer. Where's my crickets? Up? Okay. So if I had a specific fuel consumption of 1, that'd be good?
That'd be, yeah.
No, if this went up to 77, that would be bad, wouldn't it?
Double.
Yeah, that would not be good. So higher numbers would be worse. All right, G. So we also have brake specific fuel consumption. Or brake specific fuel consumption. And that's it's almost the same thing. It's just a ratio of pounds of fuel burned per hour to each brake horsepower. It's basically the same. It's used interchangeably with specific fuel consumption. All right. So I think we've kind of covered that. Now we can go right back to where we just were a minute ago. With leaning. And why is this important? So maybe you're sitting there thinking, self, because that's what you call yourself, right? I am not a pilot. I don't want to be a pilot. Why am I having to deal with all of this leaning? Well, if you are going to work around aircraft, you're going to be talking to pilots. And pilots, well, what happens is you don't want to be this person. You're working on an aircraft and it's got a bad exhaust valve. And so the pilot says, I got a bad exhaust valve. What do you think happened? And then you say something like, you're running Lena Peak, aren't you? The guy says, yeah, well, I read all this stuff. You're burning your exhaust valves, man. See, do you already think that that's a falsehood? Well, you should, because the way I'm telling the story. But you guys already know that that's not true, right? Just running Lena Peak, is that going to burn an exhaust valve? No, but that's kind of what has been the norm or the way of thinking. Is that true, Juan? Yeah, he's just, yeah. but it's not true.
Yeah.
So and the reason why this is this way is because we're going through this paradigm shift in the way we're thinking about how to operate engines. It's funny, if you go way back in time, it's called something like the Wright method of leaning, and I think I got some notes on it, but it was developed by Wright engine manufacturers, and they're big Wright radial engines, and they did this bizarro way of leaning where, and remember, these are now constant speed props with turbochargers and stuff, and they would get the engine all set up, and then they would lean the snot out of it and lose a whole bunch of power. And then they would take the throttle and just shove it right back in and watch the manifold pressure go up. And when manifold pressure goes up, what does that do to horsepower? It goes up. Now the RPM stays constant because it's a constant speed propeller, and it has a governor, and it changes the pitch to keep it just nailed at that RPM. So RPM is not going to change. But you push in the throttle, and it opens up the throttle plate and allows a lot more air in. So I leaned the heck out of it, then I opened the throttle and let more air in. What did that do?
Lower down.
Well, a lot more lean. But I brought the manifold pressure up, so what did it do to horsepower? It, in theory, restored all the horsepower lost from leaning the heck out of it. And that was called the Wright method of, there's a better term, I forget, but it was the Wright method of leaning. And so now that's one thing, all right? So some people kind of get this confused with this lean of peak, and that's a whole nother thing. You wouldn't catch me doing that method. And the reason why is because we go back to those aircraft back in the day that had the giant radial engines that were transport category aircraft. They had a crew of how many? Not passengers, crew. How many did they have for crew? 4 or 5. You had a pilot, a co-pilot, a navigator, and an engineer. What did the engineer do?
Check all the engine and everything.
He just ran the engines, right? And so you had one dedicated person to doing this, and they had horsepower meters on it and all kinds of stuff. So we don't have all of that, so that's a whole other thing. But I think that then became this. There may have been some incidences or something where people were trying that with their small planes, not managing it correctly, leaning at high power settings, and yes, causing detonation. And this became bad, and so then leaning became this bad thing, and then you were supposed to keep it on the rich side and never go on the lean side because you'll detonate and you'll burn up your engine. And then now that we have people like, I think it's GAMI is one of the huge, they're the ones doing most of the research. You have GAMI injectors? Yeah. So GAMI is this company that, I remember, seems like I remember when they came out. Basically what they did is they started messing with Continentals. And the fuel injected Continentals, and they started saying, every cylinder isn't the same. They're each individual cylinders. They started treating them like individual cylinders and saying that, hey, maybe this cylinder up here needs a little more fuel or a smaller, larger nozzle than this one back here, because if all the nozzles are the same, these get more and these get less. And so let's match and put these nozzles in so that every cylinder is getting the exact same amount of fuel. And then they started doing these experiments with leaning and what happens when you lean, and discovering a lot of the stuff that I'm talking to you about how going lean of peak was really quite fine, and it decreased the lead deposits, the engine ran cooler, the valves were lasting longer. So they find all these huge benefits. But yet the one major negative is you still run lean of peak in a high RPM setting, you're going to detonate your engine. So you as a pilot, you have to be very careful to make sure you're enriching. Like if you're lean of peak and you're flying along, you're cruising, and suddenly, you get a vector and you're told to climb or something. For whatever reason you decided to climb, and so you add the power to go up. Hey, you forgot to push the red button in. Now you can detonate. So you see, you can get into that. So you have to be careful. Maybe that's why there's this bad thing about it, but it's not bad. And of course, we do have to lean as you go up, because if you don't, you're just going to lose power. So leaning. Why do we have to lean? Well, as the aircraft changes in altitude, the mixture adjusted. I'll tell you when I learned to fly. I learned to fly in a Cessna 140, and the Cessna 140 has a Stromberg carburetor. And that doesn't mean much to you right now, but in about 2 weeks, in a week, it's going to mean, oh, I get it. So remember, I flew the Stromberg carburetor, and my instructions, as are most instructions, no matter what carburetor you're flying, to flight students. Who's been a flight student here? Okay, can I pick on Steve? Steve, who's your flight instructor? Okay, so it's not Phil. Phil is probably a whole different story. He'll probably, I don't know who this is. What instructions have you been given on leaning the aircraft?
We just pulled it out, watched the RPMs change a couple of times, and that was it.
Okay, so basically you're told to,
Just pull it, just find the max RPMs and do it all.
okay, pull it back, find max RPM, leave it alone. When would you start leaning?
When the RPMs started to drop.
Okay, so you got to get so high up in altitude that the RPM starts to drop. Okay. Tyler?
Lean until you find peak.
When did you start leaning?
Probably about
4,000?
4,000.
All right. Well, anybody else?
Progressively as you climb.
Okay. I was pretty much told, don't even bother with it till you get to 5,000 feet, first of all. Just leave it alone. But in the Cessna 140 with the Stromberg, I was told, it doesn't do anything, don't even touch it. Just leave it alone. And to that person's credit, the Stromberg was used on your Arankas and your Cubs and all these small planes. The mixture was an option. So when you ordered your airplane, it's like, you want the mixture or not? And it became so if you didn't want it, they did one of two things. They either put a plate on it that some of you have seen that just it wasn't there, or they put the mixture control on and safety wired it to full rich down inside of the engine. There was no knob. So, and then, well, to make matters worse, Stromberg's, we'll get into those, but there's this misconception that the Stromberg mixture, it just doesn't work anyway. But I'm going to prove to you guys that it works really well. And you're going to be surprised at how well they actually work. And everybody else saying, they don't work, but I'll prove to you that they would do. So anyway, but as the aircraft changes in altitude, the mixture must be adjusted. We still have time. Yay. Why? Why do I want to do that? This is what Tyler said. Yeah.
What kind of system do they have for automatically leaning? How does that work?
It's a little monkey that's up there. And it's a carburetor monkey. We'll talk about that. Automatic mixture controls. All right, 2. Right, we want to lean it so we maintain power. As we go up, we're going to be losing power because we're going to be running rich or lean as we climb. It's going to get rich. And so if we bring it back to, I keep wanting to say stoichiometric, but we know that's not right, back to best power, if that's what we're shooting for, we're going to get more power. To maintain power. Well, that's kind of a redundant statement. To prevent an overly rich mixture. So maintain power. Well, rich as aircraft climbs. What's going to happen as we descend?
It's lean.
Okay. Well, assuming that we're working it to begin with. All right, let's see. Let's talk about some definitions. CHT. Huh? Collection, holding, and transfer. No, I'm sorry. This isn't the Navy class. It's a bad joke because
What was that? Again?
that's what the poop tanks are called on a ship. The collection, holding, and transfer system. So, cylinder head temp. What's that?
How do we get from A to B?
Well, because A is there. Oops, did I go D? Let's see.
It looks like
He is there. He is here. Don't worry about
Thank
it.
you.
Right?
B.
Exactly, just.
I try. You got to give me some credit for effort, maybe. I don't know.
You have a deeper.
Thank you. That's some credit. That's all I asked for was some credit. And
Too bad D isn't passing this class.
so EGT's exhaust gas temp. What is my what do I keep saying red line for CHT should be? There you go. So 400. So 400 degrees F. That's max. That's me. Exhaust gas temp. Well, what's red line for exhaust gas temp? There isn't. Trick question.
Whatever your heart desires.
But what's it going to read? About 12,000 to 17, not 12,000, 1,200. That's really hot. You can tell it's time to go, right? I should quit. I should have quit while I was ahead before we got into letter D here. Let's see. Actual number is not relevant to a point. And like I said, the early EGTs, they didn't put numbers because they felt it was absolutely irrelevant. It's like, it's just a reference. Oops, that's a P. Peak. So if I talk peak EGT, that's the highest. Rich of peak. Just ROP. A rich mixture that will drop EGT temps. Wow, I just wrote exhaust gas temp.
Nice job.
I know. And then when I'm done with here, I'm going to go to the ATM machine.
And put in your PIN number.
Yes, put in my PIN number. Thank you. Lean at peak. LOP. The rich at lean. Mix. That will drop the, might as well just go all out. Exhaust EGT temp.
That's like saying a hot water heater.
Yes, it's exactly like saying the hot water heater. All right. I'm going to put a C there. And we're going to stop there.